We shall talk about Plato's attack on poetry or Plato's objections to poetry. The background is that during Plato's time, art and literature were on the decline. It means the popularity of literature, popularity of art was decreasing, and philosophy became more important than art. As the philosophy became important, philosophers also became important people, and the philosophers started discussing topics like ideal state and ideal society. What should be the ideal state? What should be the ideal society? How should it be formed? In Plato's dialogue, titled as a Republic, he discusses the reason for decline in moral values in the society. He wants to find out why people are behaving immorally. He wants to find out the reason for immorality in society. And he says in one of his discussions that arts are one of the reasons for decline in morality. Now, Plato has three objections to poetry. Number one, poetic inspiration. Number two, its non moral character. And number three, its emotional appeal. Let us try to see what is meant by poetic inspiration when Plato is discussing so. As we have already seen, Plato has said that art is twice removed from reality and therefore poetry is also twice removed from reality. And Plato says that poetry makes men believe in the imperfection. Why? Because when a poet composes a poem, it is not an outcome of the thought of the poet, but it is the outcome of the inspiration of the poet. Poetry may contain truth, but poetry is not written by thinking about a certain issue. So, reason or intellect is not the source of poetry. It has a divine source. According to Plato, poetic inspiration is divine, but that divine inspiration is not logical, it is not reasonable, it cannot take place of philosophy. Therefore, poetry cannot replace philosophy. Philosophy is more important than poetry because philosophy is a result of deep thought, according to Plato. Secondly, poetry has emotional appeal. He says that poetry affects the emotion. When people read poetry, they become emotional. So it has an appeal to the heart and not to the head. Intellectual appeal is not present in poetry. Emotional appeal is present in poetry. And emotions are temporary. You cannot rely on emotions. you can take wrong decisions under the influence of emotions. You should rely on intelligence. You should rely on intellect, reason. If you want to become a good person, you cannot be emotional. So, emotions cannot be safe guides to people. Third objection of Plato is the non moral character of poetry. In the time of Plato, epics of Homer were very popular, and when we read these poems, we find that it treats both virtue and vice alike. That is, good and bad are treated on the same level in poetry. Sometimes the good wins, sometimes the bad wins. That is, virtue is important sometimes, virtue prevails sometimes it is defeated by vice, or good is defeated by bad. And people cannot reach a conclusion that good will always win. This decreases the confidence of people in morality. And it may suggest that being immoral is all right. In the view of Plato, poetry corrupts human beings. So, the conclusion that we can reach is poets are not welcome in the ideal state of Plato. He says poets are good, poets have divine inspiration, poets write beautiful poems, but the purpose of poetry is to give pleasure, and pleasure doesn't make good people. That is why people should stay away from poetry.